Hello everyone. The Russian Federation is a vast country spanning Eastern Europe and Northern Asia, with an area of up to 17,125,000. This country is bordered by the Arctic Ocean to the north, the Pacific Ocean to the east, and the Baltic Sea, Black Sea, and Caspian Sea to the west and southwest, with a coastline stretching up to 37,000. However, much of Russia's coastline is often frozen year-round, which limits their fishing grounds. Despite this, offshore fishing remains one of the important economic activities, bringing huge profits to the country. Therefore, Russia always strives to protect the less frozen sea areas, especially the seafood resources. Located off the Far East, the Sea of Okhotsk is one of the most important fishing grounds in the Arctic region. However, this place was once a nightmare for Russia, as there was an unclaimed area in the middle of the Sea of Okhotsk, known as the Peanut Hole. Let's explore it together in today. Where is the Sea of Okhotsk located? This is a sea area in the Northwest Pacific, surrounded by regions of the Russian Far East. Specifically Sakhalin Oblast, Khabarovsk Krai, Magadan Oblast, and Kamchatka. To the southeast, it borders the Kuril Islands, currently a disputed territory between Russia and Japan, but under Moscow's control. To the south, it borders Hokkaido Island of the land of the rising. The Sea of Okhotsk is connected to the Sea of Japan to the west and south of Sakhalin, specifically to the west via Sakhalin Gulf and Tatar Strait, and to the south via the Lapinus Strait. This sea area has an area of 1,583,000 square kilometers, with an average depth of 859 meters and a maximum depth of cold air currents from Siberia form sea ice in the northwest of the Sea of Okhotsk. When ice forms, it pushes salt down to deeper waterways. This heavy water flows eastward to the Pacific Ocean, carrying oxygen and nutrients, supporting the rich development of marine life in this area, especially high-value economic fish species. However, this sea area is facing many risks due to climate change. Since pre-industrial times, the Sea of Okhotsk has warmed by up to 3 degrees Celsius in some areas, and this rate is twice as fast as the global average. In winter, navigation in the Sea of Okhotsk is hindered by drifting ice, and vessels passing through here must rely on the assistance of icebreakers. Russia currently possesses the world's largest icebreaker fleet with about 40 ships, and is also the only country in the world operating a nuclear-powered icebreaker fleet. During the Cold War, Okhotsk was the sea area where ballistic missile submarines were based, as part of the Soviet Pacific Fleet. And in 1983, President Ronald Reagan launched the Strategic Defense Initiative missile defense, making the Cold War hotter than ever. And in the Sea of Okhotsk, on September 1, 1983, the Soviet Air Force shot down a Korean civilian Boeing 747-230. All 269 passengers and crew members perished, including U.S. Congressman Lawrence McDonald. To this day, this is still considered one of the most tragic aviation accidents in the world. And in 2015, declassified Japanese documents partly clarified it, while exonerating the Soviet Union for the unintentional mishap. According to these, this Boeing was on a routine flight from New York to Seoul, and transited through the city of Anchorage in the U.S. state of Alaska. However, after taking off from Anchorage to head to the capital Seoul of South Korea, it unexpectedly changed course to fly over the Kamchatka Peninsula and Sakhalin, where many military bases and other secret facilities were located. Notably, this aircraft entered Soviet airspace at the same time as the U.S. Boeing RC-135. Additionally, it is unclear why, throughout the flight, the signal lights on the Boeing 747-230B were all leading the Soviet side to not think it was a civilian aircraft. And in conditions of extreme darkness, the Soviet military was unable to identify the suspicious aircraft, so they decided to shoot down the intruding aircraft, fearing it was on a reconnaissance and about to escape with the collected data. PENATO, an international sea area located within the Sea of Okhotsk. Currently, all islands and mainland around the Sea of Okhotsk are under Russian management, except for Hokkaido Island belonging to Japan. Therefore, most of this sea area falls under Russia's exclusive economic zone extends from Sakhalin Island, running along the Russian coast to the end of the Kamchatka Peninsula, then through the Kuril Islands to Sakhalin Island. However, located in the center of the Sea of Okhotsk is considered an international because this area lies more than 200 nautical miles from Russia, that is 370 kilometers, so it does not fall within Russia's exclusive economic zone. Accordingly, this area has a width from west to east of about, and a length from north to south of 480 kilometers. Also because of its elongated shape, quite similar to a peanut, that the name PEN, temporarily translated as peanut hole. Besides PENATO in the Sea of Okhotsk, there are currently several such areas in the world located in the Gulf of Mexico and Barents. Notably, the area around PENATO is home to many species of fish, crabs and other, among which the Alaska pollet population currently dominates in this area. This is a fish species with significant economic value, as it is a very healthy food. Therefore, this fish is consumed in large quantities by developed countries. In general, not only possessing abundant seafood resources, but this area is also assessed to have potential for oil and gas. Although there are no exact figures, the oil and gas potential here is not small at all. For a long time, the Sea of Okhotsk in general and PENATO in particular were under Soviet, without any invasion or disputes. Or in other words, no vessels from any country dared to approach here. However, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, things have become much more complicated. Fishing vessels from everywhere flooded into the PENATO area from led by Polish vessels and then vessels from South Korea, China, Japan, Ukraine and Bulgaria. It can be seen that the huge seafood resources here have caused many countries to disregard the remote geographical conditions, and Poland is a typical example of this. It must be said this is an extremely special case, because this country does not border Russia. And above all, it is located very far from the PENATO. To get here, Polish fishermen had to depart from the North Sea, overcoming a difficult journey of nearly 20,000 kilometers to reach this place. To explain the activities of these fishing vessels, we must mention current international law on sea area. Previously, international sea area, meaning the entire area beyond the 3 nautical mile territorial sea, about 5.6 kilometers. However, with the emergence of the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law, accompanied by the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, about 370 kilometers, the scope of international sea areas has been significantly narrowed. According to international law, in international sea areas all countries have the freedom of overflight, freedom to lay submarine cables and pipelines, freedom of fishing, and therefore, countries must respect the interests of other countries, as well as comply with relevant provisions of the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention, such as protecting the marine environment, conserving marine living resources, and cooperation to avoid piracy. In general, regarding geographical scope, international sea areas are determined, thus, it includes all sea areas not part of the internal waters, territorial seas, archipelago, and exclusive economic zones of coastal. Therefore, the exclusive economic zone is not international, and no country has the right to claim sovereignty over the high seas. It can be seen that the Banat-How area in the Sea of Okhotsk lies outside Russia's. If calculated according to the aforementioned 1982 Law of the Sea Convention, this is an international sea area, so any country has the right to fish here. However, perhaps during the time when the Soviet Union was strong, not many countries dared to venture here. Good news travels fast. Within just 1 year, many fishing fleets from neighboring countries flocked to the sea area, and it is estimated they harvested about 1 billion tons of Alaska pollet at Banat. As a country with sovereignty over most of the Sea of Okhotsk, Russia also took very strong and tough protest actions. Moscow argued that countries fishing an extremely large amount at Banat-How would cause many disadvantages to the Alaska pollet population scattered in Russia, because many types of fish migrate, and Alaska pollet is no exception. Therefore, the Kremlin considered this a danger to Russia's fish stocks, as they tend to move from the country's exclusive economic zone into Banat-How. Besides threatening the sustainability of fish stocks, this incident also forced to prevent these vessels from fishing in the national sovereign waters. In 1993, Russia finally held a meeting with representatives from Poland, China, Japan, and South Korea. Eventually, these countries agreed to halt fishing until the fish stocks are recovered. However, illegal fishing remained a very painful issue, as no formal agreement or legal binding was adopted by the parties afterward. In another effort, Russia, as one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, continuously promoted the adoption of the agreement on straddling fish stocks. It was finally adopted on August 4, 1995, and came into effect on December 11, 2001. Compared to the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention, The agreement on straddling fish stocks established many obligations in management of marine biological resources, including substantive and instant. These obligations encourage member states to develop sustainable, but also have the right to impact freedom of fishing on the high seas. Countries wishing to continue harvesting seafood on the high seas must join the regional or accept the conservation and management measures issued by that regional organization. Otherwise, countries will not have the right to access and will not be granted fishing licenses for their vessels, for the fish stocks subject to conservation and management. In other words, the country's freedom to fish on the high seas will be invalidated if they do not comply with the above requirement. This may also be why the agreement, adopted in 1995, has only 91 members today, much lower than the 169 members of the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. However, these are only agreements of a hortatory nature, not truly decisive, because they do not require all countries to participate in signing. It was not until 2013 that Russian President Vladimir Putin decided to resolve this issue thoroughly, while reinforcing the country's legal claim to the Private House Sea area. On February 28, 2013, the Russian Federation requested the UN to recognize Planet House, and was subsequently accepted for consideration by the organization. By March 14, 2014, the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf officially approved Russia's request and declared Planet House part of the country's continental shelf. This decision also granted Russia exclusive economic rights, including fishing and exploitation of natural resources. Sovereign rights are exclusive, so no one has the right to explore the continental shelf or exploit the resources of the continental shelf without boss. Since then, Russia has also closed the OCO's fishing ground, and the two countries suffering the most damage are China and Japan, as this is considered an important fishing ground located near the How important are the Private House and the OCO's sea to Russia? In terms of economic benefits, the Barents Sea, OCO Sea, and Bering Sea are currently the areas accounting for up to 70%, but the main offshore fish caught by this country itself is Alaska pollock, accounting for 35% to 40%, followed by Pacific mackerel, Atlantic mackerel, and herring. Meanwhile, since the Private House waters were recognized as under Russian jurisdiction, Moscow's rights to harvest Alaska pollock in this area. This also aligns with increasing the productivity and export volume of this fish, while bringing substantial profits to Russians, especially for fishermen in the Far East region. In addition to economic development potential, Russia also wants to strengthen geopolitical and strategic factors. As Russia is facing a series of sanctions, the country is focusing on opening an exit to new markets in Asia, aiming to expand the supply base for raw materials. Additionally, Russia wants to diversify the operations of domestic oil and gas corporations, reduce production costs, and gain more. Given the characteristics of geopolitical factors, the OCO Sea has also become a crucial gateway that Russia wants to utilize to fulfill the above needs. Moreover, over the years, the U.S. Navy has frequently sent its warships to various sea areas around the world. Particularly, the warships of the United States often operate actively in waters. In that context, the situation in the OCO Sea is attracting a lot of curiosity, because even the U.S. Navy feels apprehensive when entering this area. It can be seen that the OCO Sea, with its natural characteristics, holds strategic importance for Russia. The climate of this region is relatively cold, from late autumn to spring. The sea surface is covered with a fairly thick layer, making passage extremely difficult without an accompanying icebreaker. Therefore, for a significant portion of the year, the aforementioned area is effectively closed to the U.S. Navy. Because a key factor is that the Americans do not have a sufficient number of necessary items. Additionally, there is a legal aspect to this issue, which is that OCOs is essentially a sea area under Russian sovereignty. Thus, if U.S. Navy warships enter Russian waters without permission, this action would be equivalent to an invasion of Russian territory. Furthermore, it cannot be overlooked that the OCO Sea is also the base for nuclear submarines of the Pacific Fleet. This reality makes the OCO Sea likened to an impregnable fortress of Russia, with a large number of naval and air bases, as well as a strong air defense network deployed here. Therefore, Russia's OCO Sea is not only geographically unsuitable for U.S. Navy maritime, but also an anti-access area from a security perspective. Notably, on July 31, 2002, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree approving the new naval doctrine of the Russian Federation. This is the highest-level strategic planning document, detailing the Moscow government's approach to the naval domain. With this new doctrine, there is a major change in classifying all sea areas worldwide into 3 levels, based on Russia's readiness to use armed force on these waterways. Level 1 includes areas of vital importance, where Moscow may use all its strength to protect its interests, including armed forces. And these areas include Russia's territorial waters and exclusive economic zones, and part of the Russian Caspian Sea, the Okhotsk Sea, and extensive areas of the Arctic Ocean. Currently, besides counterbalancing the US and Japan, the Okhotsk Sea is also one of the for Moscow to realize the prospect of developing the Eurasian sea trade route through the Arctic Ocean. At the forum commemorating the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative held in Beijing from October 17 to 18, President Vladimir Putin extended an invitation to interested countries to jointly participate in developing this ambitious. Accordingly, the Northern Sea Route, or the Sea Route through the Arctic Ocean, is a maritime transport arc running along Russia's sea areas in the Arctic Ocean and the Pacific to the Barents Sea and the White Sea in the western part of the country. For example, the sea voyage from Dalian port in China's Liaoning province to Rotterdam port in the Netherlands, known as Europe's Central Logistics Port, will be just over 16,000 kilometers long, while the old route passing through the Suez Canal and the Strait of Malacca takes over 22,000 kilometers. Overall, with a shortened maritime route, trade activities from Asia to Europe will bring strategic significance to Russia in both economic and military aspects. And that is the information about the Banat area located in Russia's Sea of Okhotsk. Hello and see you again in the next videos.